Hello everyone, welcome to the first Casey production. Today we will be taking a look at the Memphis, Tennessee riot that took place in 1886, May 1st through May 3rd, during which black men, women, and children were attacked for 3 days. Let's get started. These attacks can be traced back to an altercation between white Irish police officers and black soldiers who had been stationed at Fort Pickering just outside the city. So the question stands. Why in 1866, May 1st through 3rd, was there a riot of such brutality, and why was it allowed to proceed for 3 days with no intervention? There are 4 major causes for this riot. Number 1, the Civil War ending. Losing a war is a major cause for unrest and anger. Most Southern white peoples were upset over the fact that slavery was being forcibly removed from their way of life. Once enslaved men and women were fighting for rights, fighting for jobs, and fighting against Southerners for the Union. Number 2, Irish-black competition. Slaves being freed really put a strain on Irish immigrants, causing job competition between the Irish and the newly freed black community. These freedmen were dominating the skilled and unskilled labor that was once a way for Irish immigrants to gain upward mobility. Number 3, hate. The hatred between white policemen and black Union soldiers, to be exact. At this time in Memphis, 90% of the police force and 87% of the firemen were Irish. A reason for such hate stems from Union occupation of Memphis. What this occupation does is give recently freed black soldiers who would have been patrolling the street the ability, for lack of a better word, to boss white people around, giving orders to white people such as "move along." This, in and of itself, caused tensions to rise. Number 4, fear. Fear of the police in particular. The white police officer would find any reason to enforce brutality onto freedmen. An example of this happened late in April when 5 policemen began dragging a loud black man through the street. When the man tried to ask why he was being arrested, an officer came up from behind and struck him in the back of the head. The man tried to pull back, and when he did, they struck him again. This time, he fell to the mud. The officers called a dray, a large cart used to transport goods. It was to be placed on top of the man, and then they left him there. Acts like these were not uncommon in the South, especially in Memphis. Police brutality and open racism proved that black peoples were going to have to stick up for themselves. Another type of fear is that former slave owners were afraid that retribution might be coming from these freedmen. Most people, not just previous slave owners, were afraid of losing jobs, losing control, and afraid of losing their lives, which they believed were being threatened by the freedmen. With black peoples believing that no help is coming from the law, and white police and white citizens believing that their way of life is being taken from them by freedmen, all this tension is ready to boil over. And on May 1st, the tipping point was finally reached at 3 in the afternoon, when police officers attempted to arrest a black man based on disorderly conduct committed the previous afternoon. Some 50 uniformed black soldiers took notice to what was happening and successfully rescued the black man using force as the officers were trying to lead him away. Clearly taken back by this, the police needed to regroup. Nearly an hour later, police returned to find several recently discharged veterans drinking. The police walked in and began to arrest 2 of the soldiers for disturbing the peace. The police proceeded to take their prisoners away to jail, but they didn't make it 40 yards down the streets when shots had been fired. Witnesses of both black and white state that some veterans fired their pistols in the air, but the lawmen believed they were being shot at. The police, being startled by this gunfire, turned around and started firing aimlessly into the crowd, then retreated with the arrested men. Many ex-soldiers pursued and rescued the men, but the police came back, only to find nearly 150 ex-soldiers were there waiting. The 2 groups exchanged gunfire, ending in the police retreating and the soldiers returning to the fort just outside the city. It is noted that all soldiers had to report into the fort by 10 p.m. 2 squads of Union regulars were dispatched to break up crowds and disarm any citizens, yet they failed to take arms away from the police who were witnessed by the soldiers engaging in violence. When all the black vets reached the fort, the riots seemed to end. Shortly after the squads who had been patrolling the city returned to their fort, a large group of white citizens, led by police and firemen, arrived at the location of the disturbances. Finding the streets empty, proceeded to break up into smaller groups and, led by the policemen, began to invade the black community, robbing, raping, and beating the inhabitants. Before dawn of the next day, rioters stopped and returned to their homes. But before noon on May 2nd, another large white mob returned to killing, robbing, and burning. Yet another day and night of unchecked violence. On the 3rd day of May, Tennessee Military General George Stoneman declared martial law, deploying large amounts of soldiers. The destruction included 91 houses and cabins, 4 churches, and 12 schools. Over $100,000 in damages was caused. 30 black men, women, and children were killed. 50 were wounded. 2 white men were killed, one by a mishandled gun, the other through a mistake by another white man. The reason this riot was able to proceed with little to no resistance is because the lack of intervention by Mayor John Park, Tennessee Military General George Stoneman, and Sheriff Winters. Mayor John Park is said to have been drunk the whole time the riot was going on, or he had sympathy with the mob laying waste to the city and its black inhabitants. His influence did more harm than good, inciting the rioting to continue. In a local newspaper, the Public Ledger states that Park was on the field cheering the white people on and doing nobly. Sheriff Winters reached out to Stoneman on the first day rioting began, seeking assistance from the state. Stoneman wouldn't send any troops, but he did advise Winters to gather a mob of citizens to restore order. This almost instantly backfired on him as his mob was turned against him. After the riot, all Winters could say was that the better citizens refused to join the peacemaking efforts. Last, and maybe the biggest part of all, General George Stoneman. Stoneman is quoted when asked about why he didn't intervene sooner, stating he wanted the local authorities to, quote, take care of themselves. Also, Stoneman wouldn't intervene unless the mayor sent him a written letter asking for assistance. Yet circumstantial evidence indicates that Stoneman was a white supremacist. Stoneman had several people reach out to him to send assistance, including United States Marshal T. Reeder, told Stoneman that Winters' posse turned into a murderous mob. To this, the general expressed regrets, but his main concern was to guard public property. He did command the men at Fort Pickering to be on the ready if lawlessness was allowed to continue, but on May 2nd, ordered them to stay in the fort. In conclusion, the reason this riot started can be attributed to the turnover from the Civil War, along with the hatred and fear between Irish immigrants and black peoples. How did it last for 3 days? Because of Mayor John Park, General Stoneman, and Sheriff Winters' failure to control the situation, either through the inability to handle the mobs or by wanting to see the rioting continue.